Today we're going to visit Rottingdean and the final resting place of the legend that is Gary Moore, on this, the 10-year anniversary of his tragic early passing. In today's video, we're going to pay a tribute to one of my all-time favourite guitarists, Gary Moore, who was taken from us way too soon. I find it really hard to believe that now it's 10 years since we lost him, and today we're going to mark that occasion with what I hope will be a fitting tribute to his genius and testament to a guitar player who moved so many with his emotive playing. We'll have the usual tribute biography, and I also go on my 4th pilgrimage to Gary's grave to pay my respects. Finally, if you stick around till later in the video, we'll also hear my Gary style riff put into a complete tune at last. Channel regulars will know that I've been playing this riff for so long. Everybody thinks it's a Gary Moore riff, and that's always a source of joy to me, because to think that I could write a riff that sounds like my hero is incredible. So I've put it into a proper tune later in this video, but first of all we'll check out the biography of Gary Moore as set out on his own website, as I think it's a perfect tribute. Acknowledged as one of the finest musicians that the British Isles has ever produced, and with a career that dated back to the 1960s, there were few musical genres that Gary Moore had not turned his adroit musical hand to. Gracing the lineups of several notable rock bands, Thin Lizzy, Colosseum 2 and the original Skid Row in his time, he also established himself as a world-class guitarist with few equals. Gary was born in Belfast, Northern Ireland on the 4th of April 1952. Like many others, he was turned on to rock and roll through first hearing Elvis Presley and then via the Beatles. Seeing the likes of Jimi Hendrix and John Mayall's Blues Breakers in his hometown in the mid-60s opened him up to a rich world of the blues. Hearing the art of the blues guitar performed by such lauded exponents as Peter Green fired Moore's nascent talent, and it wasn't long before he was being hailed as a teen musical prodigy. Indeed, it was Green himself who helped foster Moore's career, a debt that was handsomely repaid when Gary cut his warm, heartfelt tribute to his mentor, the Blues for Greenie album released in 1995. Gary's first band of note, the power trio Skid Row, secured a record deal with CBS label in 1970. By this time, Gary had moved to Dublin and befriended a certain Philip Lynott, who filled the vocal role with Skid Row until shortly before the CBS deal was signed. Gary cut 3 albums with the band and toured the USA supporting the Allman Brothers Band and Mountain, among others, before he left Skid Row to embark on a solo career. This proved short-lived, as Gary was soon to reunite with Phil Lynott as a replacement for Eric Bell in the Thin Lizzy lineup. Although he was in the band for a relatively brief tenure, he would rejoin their ranks following the departure of Brian Robertson in 1977, and again finally as a full band member for the Black Rose album and tour in 1978. In 1979, Gary's solo career began in earnest with the evocative hit single Parisian Walkways, which pitched Gary's tasteful blues-soaked lead guitar with a moody Phil Lynott guest vocal. The single reached the UK top 10 in April of that year, and the subsequent album Back on the Streets was similarly well received. The late 1970s and early 80s were characterised by Gary's restless search for the best musical settings for his talents. A reunion with Phil Lynott produced the powerful Out in the Fields hit single in 1985. He explored his Celtic roots on the album Wild Frontier in 1987, but it was with his 1990 album Still Got the Blues that Gary arrived at a rich musical vein within which his creativity could flow freely. And its successor, After Hours, saw cameo appearances from the likes of blues guitar greats as Albert King, B.B. King and Albert Collins, and is a testament to Gary's own remarkable talents that he more than held his own amongst such august company. In 1994, Gary worked alongside Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce in the BBM, cutting one accomplished album before resuming his solo career. The Back to the Blues 2001 album saw him revisit the blues with renewed vigour and determination after the more experimental Dark Days in Paradise from 1997 and A Different Beat in 1999, those albums. A 10-track collection that mixed excellent Moore originals with gritty and intense standard covers, but in the tradition keeping his fans and critics guessing. 2002 saw Gary crashing back onto the music scene with what had to be his heaviest collection of songs since the late 1980s, once again forcing people to reassess any opinions and preconceptions that they might have had of him. That time round though, Moore had decided to share the limelight, joining forces with ex-Skunk Anansie bassist Cass Lewis and Primal Scream drummer Darren Mooney from Scars, a true power trio in every respect. The Scars album was completed in early 2002, and that lineup then went on to record the Live at the Monsters of Rock 2003 live CD and DVD, which featured the band's set as performed on two separate nights on the UK tour in May 2003. That live set encompassed a diverse range of material across Gary's playing career. 2004 saw possibly the rawest album yet with Power of the Blues. The 10-track set, recorded mostly live in the studio, ranged from the hard rock blues of the title track via the upbeat swing of Can't Find My Baby to the haunting Torn Inside. Taking time out in August 2005 for a brief reunion with former Thin Lizzy members for a one-off concert in Dublin to mark the occasion of Phil Lynot's birth, the evening was filmed at 2006 DVD release, Gary Moore and Friends One Night in Dublin, a tribute to Phil Lynott. With his 2007 studio album Close As You Get, Gary continued in a direction not too dissimilar from Old New Ballads Blues, released in 2006, mixing original tunes with some interesting blues covers that Gary had rediscovered while researching for his award-winning radio series Blues Power for Planet Rock. September 2008 saw the release of what would turn out to be Gary's last studio album, Bad For You Baby. Again, a powerful collection of tracks mixing original material and selected blues covers. After being on the road for most of 2008 and into 2010 with the blues lineup of touring band, Gary returned from a tour of Russia and the Far East and decided to reunite with his old sparring partner from the rock lineup of the 1980s, Neil Carter. The plan was to put together a rock lineup and dust off a selection of tracks from the mid to late 80s, adding John Noyce, ex-Jethro Tull, on bass, someone who was also part of the One Night in Dublin tribute DVD in 2005, and Darren Mooney, Primal Scream / Sessions, on drums, who was no stranger to the touring and recording lineup in the late 90s and early 2000s. This lineup hit the road in May of 2010, performing a live set based around a selection of tracks from Gary's rock years of the 1980s. This proved to be a real treat for fans old and new, as many would not have heard Gary play these songs live either for a very long time, or in many cases at all. In addition to the older tunes, a number of new Celtic rock style tracks were included in the show, which went down very well with live audiences. Tracks which Gary was planning to record and embellish on his next studio project. A project that was ready to start when Gary returned from a short holiday break. Unfortunately, that was not meant to be, as Gary passed away in his sleep in the early hours of the 6th of February 2011 in Estepona, Spain. After being such a force of nature in the guitar-playing firmament as part of his professional career that began when he was only 16, he leaves behind a huge hole for many, not just his close family and friends, but guitar fans around the world. All of the many tributes paid to Gary since his passing, maybe this one from Gary's friend and musical collaborator Don Airey might sum up the best of most people's thoughts of Gary. He says, "At the 1984 Donington Festival, during the long solo in empty rooms, the previously restless crowd went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone backstage and behind the scenes stopped whatever they were doing and just stood to listen open-mouthed. His artistry touched thousands of people over the years, not least those of us lucky enough to have shared a stage or recording studio with him. Sleep tight, old mate, you'll be sorely missed. This is the fourth time I've visited Gary's grave, and I try to do it any time that I'm passing Rottingdean in East Sussex. The church is a typical old-fashioned village church, although quite a big one, but it is the last place you might expect to find a rock star buried. As always, I stopped by today to pay my respects to Gary and also to leave a token of that respect. This time I left the pick I used to play the solo you'll hear at the end of this video, and as you can see, it's joined by many more picks and trinkets left at the grave. Strangely, I always find my trips to Gary's grave to be so very peaceful, even when it's raining like it was today and is so often at this time of year in the UK. I shared a few words, as I always do, and wished him peaceful rest. My earliest memories of Gary were sadly way after his stints in Thin Lizzy. I was just that little bit too young to really be into Lizzy back in the 70s when it all happened. I was just cutting my musical teeth on the Beatles back then, although I'm now obviously a huge fan of Phil and the Boys. The first time I really remember hearing Gary were on his mid-career hits Out in the Fields and Over the Fields and Far Away, both of which hit the mainstream charts in the late 1980s. I'm sad to say that I never got to see Gary live, but my buddy Andy gave me a tape of one of his live shows labelled simply God Live. Listening to that incredible show, it was easy to see how it had earned that label from Andy. My biggest memory was hearing Empty Rooms. The solo to that was simply one of the most incredibly passionate and moving bits of guitar playing that I had and still to this day have ever heard. You can see why Don Airey would choose that moment in a live show to highlight just what an incredible effect Gary at his most emotive would have on an audience. And that was back then, and little did we know that we still had the best to come. Once Gary returned to his blues roots, his playing lit up and hit a whole new level of emotion that for me will always remain his legacy. For me, Gary is right up there with the classic Three Kings, Muddy Waters, and one of my other heroes, Eric Clapton, when it comes to his blues playing. Blues players are all completely unique, as blues comes from the heart and the soul of the player, and to be authentic, you have to be able to let go and completely open yourself to express what's in your heart. Given the years it takes to become proficient on the instrument and the amount of time and practice Gary had in his career, he was at the pinnacle of his ability and chose the perfect time to go back to the blues. The amazing thing for me was that his Celtic heritage always seemed to permeate his playing, even when he was playing the blues. You could almost feel his early days in Belfast and the players and music that must have been a huge influence on him. My only regret is that Gary was taken way too soon, and I would love to have got to meet him, interview him, and most importantly to have heard the incredible music that he might have gone on to make. As my own small tribute to Gary, I'm really pleased today to share with you the track that I've written and that you could say has been 10 years in the making. Please excuse the imperfections, as I decided to keep the first take solo I did after working out the final lead line. Enjoy. I really hope that you like what I did to that little tune that I haven't been able to get out of my head. I know a lot of people will say it's a complete Gary ripoff. However, that was the point, to write a piece totally in the style Gary was renowned for. Anyway, I really hope you've enjoyed today's tribute to one of my all-time guitar heroes, and I hope if you haven't checked out Gary's music that you'll get the chance to check it out soon, as I know you'll love it. May he rest in peace. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and it can never hurt to subscribe. I'll be back really soon with the best content I can, just as soon as I can. But in the meantime, as always, my friends, you take good care.